Welcome back to Close Up. Corky Messner emerged from a hard-fought Republican primary to take on Jeanne Shaheen. And now he has the tall order of trying to take down the two-term incumbent who has had her name on New Hampshire ballots dating back 3 decades now. Mr. Messner is our guest this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
So if the polls are to be believed, you're down by double digits in this race heading into the final 2 weeks. In the sports world parlance, how do you shock the world here and pull off this upset?
You know, Adam, from day one, we've worked every day as if we're way behind, and we will continue to work every day as if we're way behind to get our message out and to let people know that we're fighting for their individual liberty and their economic freedom, that we're fighting to bring jobs back, that we're fighting to help small businesses. And at the end of the day, we believe that working hard and getting our message out will result in a win on November 3rd.
The senator has attacked you quite a bit lately on the Affordable Care Act, specifically the issue of pre-existing conditions. When she brings up that pre-existing conditions could be stripped away and therefore coverage would be knocked out by the Supreme Court, you said that's a fear tactic. That may be true, but it's also possibly true that the Supreme Court could take that away, is it not?
Well, the first thing that I want everybody to know, you know, I support legislation that will ensure that everybody with pre-existing conditions, in fact, would be able to get health insurance. So no one should be denied health insurance because of pre-existing condition. In fact, what I would do, Adam, is on day one in the U.S. Senate, I would propose legislation that would, in fact, ensure that. Now, the importance of that is this. You know, November 10th, the Supreme Court is going to hear oral arguments regarding the Affordable Care Act. But everyone needs to realize that the decision on the ACA will not be made until next summer. So by passing that legislation early in January, the fear of the ACA being overturned by the Supreme Court and the consequences on pre-existing conditions, people won't have to worry about. And I might add, I don't believe that the Supreme Court is going to throw out the ACA.
You think the severability is probably going to go forward. I've got a question for you, though. There's been a lot of back and forth in this race on the issue of court packing, adding Supreme Court seats. This morning, we're putting a little bit of a twist on that and looking at the idea of adding seats to the U.S. Senate. Obviously, Democrats are in favor of Washington, D.C. statehood. We talked to Senator Shaheen about that just a few minutes ago. Curious for your perspective. First, do you support statehood for Washington, D.C.?
I do not. I do not support it. I think everyone needs to realize that, you know, the Democrats believe, wrongly in my opinion, that they're going to sweep this election, that they're going to win the presidency, win control of the Senate, keep control of the House, and that their plan then is to take actions like making Washington, D.C. a state that will keep them in power for a very, very long time. And in addition, the court packing. So both those things, making Washington, D.C. a state and court packing, are bad, and it should not happen. And the way that the people of the grand state can make sure that doesn't happen is to elect me to the U.S. Senate.
What about statehood for Puerto Rico? The Republican Party platform in 2016 said they should have a right to self-determination to figure out if they want to join the union.
Well, you know, that's up to the people of Puerto Rico to have that kind of election, but I don't think that we should bring Puerto Rico in as a state at this point either.
How about the rationale there? It seems like, as Americans, one of the fundamental beliefs is that just governance is derived from the consent of the governed, right? That people should have some kind of representation. So what's the rationale for denying statehood in the year 2020 for places like Puerto Rico and even territories like Guam? Why are there still territories and not states?
Yeah, I think those decisions need to be carefully considered. I don't think they should be made in any kind of way that is motivated by politics and motivated to get more senators that may be Democrat or Republican. So I think it's a much more complicated decision than that, and it needs to be very carefully considered as we proceed.
Can you provide an instance in which you've disagreed with your party, the GOP, or the Republican Party platform?
Oh, yeah, many times. I'll give you an example. I think, for example, that the discretionary spending in Washington, D.C. that's been going on for decades out of control, that, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, have been spending far too much money. And so I disagree with how the Republicans have been spending in Washington for a very, very long time.
Can you name a Democrat you look forward to working with in the Senate besides your potential colleague, Senator Hassan?
Yeah, I think there are several. I think Joe Manchin from West Virginia is someone that I could work with, for sure. I think, in addition, the Agnes King from Maine I could work with, for sure. So yeah, there are several.
Back to the Supreme Court here. Justices Thomas and Alito recently weighed in a ruling suggesting that the court should revisit its decision in the Obergefell case, which essentially legalized gay marriage across the country. Do you agree with them? Would you support another case coming forward to the Supreme Court that would essentially wipe out federal gay marriage and essentially return same-sex marriage to the states?
No, I would not. I think that case should stand.
Explain why.
Well, listen, I think it's been tried, it's been decided. I think there's now reliance, and we heard a lot about reliance during the Amy Coney Barrett hearings. That reliance is an important factor that the courts look at when they're looking at precedent, and at the federal level it becomes important, because people may be moving from state to state, and folks shouldn't be worrying about what their marital status is if they decide to move.
I want to revisit a question I asked you almost exactly a year ago in one of your first appearances on Close Up. I asked you if there were any cases that your law firm Messner Reeves had taken on that you regretted, that you thought you would rather have go back and undo and not take those cases. Now, a year later, some of those clients and cases have come up in the wash sort of this race, the back and forth, such as a Chinese government insurance company that's prompted some criticism from your opponent and others. So once again, do you regret taking on any of these clients?
Adam, it's important that everyone understand that my law firm is a very large law firm, and there are many cases going on in that law firm that I am simply not aware of. That in fact, I would say most cases going on and business transactions I'm not involved in. So I think this kind of political Monday morning quarterbacking is not healthy. It's not good. And, we are a business law firm. We represent a lot of clients. And I certainly am not going to say that, looking through a political lens of 2020, that I wish we hadn't done that.
Is there a plan to combat climate change that could earn your vote in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there is. And I would say the first thing we need to do is we need to recognize that climate change exists, and it has existed in the entire history of the Earth. And as you know, Adam, I care about the Earth. I've helped conserve and preserve property in New Hampshire where I live. I've helped conserve over 250 acres, so it's really, really important to me. What I am concerned about with respect to climate change is it has become so politicized, it has become so extreme on the left that it has adversely affected rational, reasonable decision making. And we see in the scientific field that any scientist that might disagree with how the left views climate change, they're ostracized, they're attacked, the mob goes after them. And that doesn't make for a good, objective scientific analysis. And as we know, for science to work, there needs to be peer review, there needs to be challenging, and that's how you end up with the best decision in science is competing views. So I would say step one would be to get out the extreme politics, try to get that out of it, and then two, what I would propose we do is bring together some scientists who are objective and unbiased, and that may be scientists who lean one way or the other, but who can come together and actually come up with an objective assessment of the causes of climate change, to the extent man-made activity is impacting climate change, and what, if anything, can be done to prevent it. And in addition to to look at it on a global perspective, we must recognize that to the extent that human activity is impacting climate change, we have a whole world of human activity. And then how do we bring about and bring the world together to help solve this problem? And I know the UN has done quite a bit of that, but I think the UN has become so politicized in this area as well. So I think it's very, very important to come up with reasonable and rational policies to get rid of the extreme political nature of this, to come up with solutions and recommendations.
All right, Corky Messner, thanks so much for joining us on Close Up. We'll see you out there on the campaign trail.
Thank you, Adam. Have a great day.
Likewise.